The train came in at 2:30 on a Thursday late October, and the sky above Harlan's Creek was the color of old bone. She stood on the platform with a canvas bag at her feet and nothing else. 19 years old. The dress she wore was clean, but had been mended at both elbows, and she stood with her hands loose at her sides and her chin level, watching the locomotive exhaust drift east across the rooftops of a town she had never seen before. A woman near the depot window said something to the woman beside her. Neither of them spoke loudly. Neither of them looked away. She had been told a man would meet her. She had been told his name, his trade, the rough dimensions of what was being arranged. She had not been told about the scar. It ran from the left corner of his jaw up through his cheekbone, pale against weathered skin, the kind of mark that does not fade, but only settles deeper over time. He was 34 years old. He was standing at the far end of the platform with his hat in his hand, and he was watching her the same way she was watching everything. Without hurry, without expression, with the particular stillness of someone who has learned that most situations resolve themselves if you give them a moment. He did not cross immediately. She noticed that. He waited until the other passengers had moved, until the platform had thinned enough that walking toward her would not be a thing the whole town could read at once. Then he came, unhurried, the hat still in his hand, and stopped at a distance that was neither close nor far. He said her name in the form of a question. She said yes. He picked up her bag without asking. He did not say anything further. He simply turned toward the street, and she fell into step beside him, because there was nothing else to do, and because the alternative was standing alone on a platform in a town where the women near the depot window were still watching. The street was packed dirt, dry despite the cold, and the wind moved through it in low, steady lines that pushed dust against the storefronts. A general store, a livery, a building with a painted sign she did not have time to read. Two boys stopped to stare and then remembered themselves and looked away. He walked without acknowledging any of it. At the end of the main street, past the last storefront, there was a house. Not large, not fine, but well maintained in the way that speaks of a person who tends to what they have. A porch, two windows facing the road. A step that looked newer than the rest of the lumber around it. He stopped at the gate. He said it was not much. He said she would have her own room, and that the arrangement was what had been agreed, and nothing more than that unless she decided otherwise. She looked at the house for a moment. Then she walked through the gate ahead of him. The inside of the house was plain and ordered. A table with two chairs. A cast-iron stove against the far wall, cold now but recently used. She could smell the ash. A shelf with 4 books and a tin cup and nothing else on it. The window above the wash basin looked out onto the back of the property, where a woodpile stood covered with canvas, lashed down against the weather. He set her bag near the foot of the stairs without being asked. The room he showed her was small. A bed with a gray wool blanket, a washstand with a cracked basin, one nail in the wall for hanging things. The window faced west, and the late afternoon light came through it at a low angle and lay across the floorboards in a long, pale stripe. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. He said there was wood enough for the stove and that she should use what she needed. He said breakfast was early, before first light, because he left early. He did not say where he left to. He did not tell her what was expected of her in the house beyond what had been written in the letters which she had read 3 times on the train and now could not fully remember. She said that was fine. He nodded and went back down the stairs, and she heard the front door. And then she heard nothing. She did not unpack the bag right away. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the stripe of light on the floor and listened to the house settle around her. It was not a frightening sound. It was the sound of a structure that had learned to hold itself. After a while, she went to the window. The street was not visible from here, only the yard, and beyond it a fence line, and beyond that open country going brown and flat toward the horizon. A crow sat on the top rail of the fence and regarded the yard with the particular patience of a thing that has nowhere else to be. She pressed her fingertips to the glass. It was cold. Downstairs, she found the stove and the wood box and got a fire going without difficulty. The tin cup on the shelf was the only cup she could find. She set water to heat and looked around the kitchen more carefully. There were supplies: beans, cornmeal, salt, a half side of bacon wrapped in cloth. Whoever had stocked this had thought ahead. She stood at the stove with her hands near the warmth and looked at the single cup on the shelf. Then she opened the cabinet below the shelf and found, pushed toward the back, a second cup, older than the first, the rim slightly chipped. She set it on the counter beside the other one. The water began to knock against the bottom of the pot. He came in through the back door just as the water reached a full boil. She did not startle. She heard his boots on the step and turned to face the door by the time it opened, which was the kind of thing she had learned to do so young. She no longer thought of it as a skill. He stopped when he saw the two cups on the counter. He looked at them for a moment, not at her, at the cups, and then he moved past her to the hook by the door and hung his coat. The scar caught the light from the stove window. She had looked at it enough times in her mind since yesterday that seeing it now was almost ordinary. He said, "The well's frozen through. There's a barrel around the east side of the house. That'll do until it thaws." She said she would remember that. He moved to the stove and looked at the pot. Then he looked at her briefly, the way a person checks that a door is closed before they speak. "You made enough for two," he said. She had. He did not say anything else. He took the chipped cup from the counter, the older one, the one she had pulled from the back of the cabinet, and she understood then that she had taken his cup without knowing it, that the one on the shelf was not the everyday cup but the replacement, and he had simply let her have it. He poured for himself. He poured for her. They stood on opposite sides of the kitchen and drank. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind had come up. She could hear it pressing against the boards of the house the way wind does in open country, testing each wall in sequence, looking for a way through. After a while, he said, "I'll be out most of the day. There's a section of fence down near the south pasture." She nodded. He said, "The axle on the wagon needs greasing before it freezes up worse. I'll get to it tonight if there's light." She said she could do the axle. He looked at her. She said, "I've done it before." He considered this in the unhurried way he seemed to consider most things. Then he said, "Grease is in the barn, left side, on the shelf above the harness pegs." She said she'd find it. He finished the coffee. He set the chipped cup down on the counter with care, the way you set something down that you don't want to chip further. Then he put his coat back on and his hat and went out the back door again into the cold and the rising wind. She stood in the kitchen for a moment after he left. The fire was good. The second cup was still in her hand, still warm. She drank. She found the grease where he said it would be. The barn was dim and cold, the kind of cold that sits in wood and doesn't move regardless of the hour. She stood at the shelf above the harness pegs until her eyes adjusted. The grease was in a small tin with no label, the lid sealed tight from the last time someone had pressed it closed with the heel of a hand. She took it, and the rag hanging folded beside it, and went to the wagon. The axle was worse than she'd expected. The grease that remained had thickened to something closer to clay, dark and seized along the joint. She crouched in the dirt and worked at it, prying the old material free before she could pack in the new. Her hands went numb inside the first few minutes. She kept working. The wind pressed under the barn doors in steady pulses. She had greased an axle the first time at 14, her father standing beside her, not helping, only watching. That was how he'd taught most things. "You do it," he'd say. "I'll tell you when you're wrong." He had not been a warm man, but he had trusted her with the actual work, and she had understood later that this was its own form of respect, even if she'd resented it at the time. She packed the grease in evenly and wiped her hands on the rag. When she came back inside, she heated water and scrubbed her hands at the basin until the feeling returned to her fingers. Then she started on the noon meal, though it was still early enough that she'd have to keep it low and slow. There was salt pork and dried beans she'd set to soak the night before without being asked. She'd found them in the low cupboard near the floor, in a cloth sack that had been tied and retied several times. Someone had been making the same meal stretch a long while. She got it going and left it to simmer. He had a shelf of things near the door she hadn't looked at directly. A hammer, two horseshoes, a folded piece of paper she hadn't touched. Above the shelf, a pair of work gloves hung on a nail. One finger of the left glove had been crudely mended with thread that didn't match. She looked at it a moment. Then she went to find the sewing basket she'd seen in the back room, in the corner near the window, where the light came in best on clear days. The thread he'd used was brown. She found something closer. Not a perfect match, but near enough that you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. She sat down by the window with the glove in her lap. Outside, the wind was steady now, and the sky had gone the color of pewter from edge to edge, and the day was long still ahead of her. She threaded the needle and began. She finished the finger of the glove before the soup had begun to steam. She held the glove up toward the window and turned it once. The mend was not invisible. Nothing sewn by hand ever truly was, but it sat flat and would hold, and the color was close enough that a man not looking would not see it at all. She set it on the windowsill and sat a moment longer with the needle in her hand. The wind had picked up outside. It came in long, low draws across the open ground east of the house, pressing at the glass without drama. The way wind out here simply was. Not threatening, just present. The way cold was present. The way distance was present. She had not thought much yet about what distance meant in a place like this. She was beginning to. She put the needle back, wound the thread, replaced everything in the basket the way she had found it, and carried the glove back to the front room. She hung it on its nail. The mended finger faced the wall. She turned it slightly so it faced out again. Then she went to check the pot. The smell had changed from raw to something close to ready. A low, starchy warmth filling the room, the kind of smell that made a space feel like somewhere rather than somewhere temporary. She stirred it once and turned the heat lower and left it. There was a broom in the corner, near the door. She used it. The floor was not filthy, but it had the grime of a man living alone in a way that had stopped noticing, the kind of dirt that accumulates not from neglect exactly, but from having no one to see it. She worked from back to front, methodical, and when she finished, she stood the broom back in its corner. She was setting the table. 2 bowls, 2 spoons, a cloth she had found folded in a drawer, when she heard the door. He came in with the cold still on him, pulling his hat off, pausing when he saw the bowls. He looked at the table a moment, then at the pot, then around the room the way a man does when he is taking inventory of what has changed. His coat went on the hook. He went to the wash basin. She ladled soup into both bowls and set the pot back and sat down. He came to the table. He looked at the bowl, and then he looked at his hands, and then he pulled the chair out and sat. He picked up the spoon. He did not say anything about the soup. He did not say anything about the clean floor. Then he looked up, not at her face, at his coat where the glove hung on the nail beside it. He looked for a moment. Then he looked down and ate. They ate without speaking. The soup was thin, dried beans, a heel of pork she had found in the cold box, a handful of something that might have been sage. It was not much. But the bowls were hot, and the room was warm, and outside the wind had come back up and was pressing against the glass. He ate steadily, not fast. Not like a man who had been waiting on a meal, but like a man who had learned not to hurry anything that didn't need hurrying. She kept her eyes on her bowl. Halfway through, he reached for the bread she had set on a folded cloth between them. He tore a piece, set the rest back. She noticed he pushed it slightly toward her side of the cloth before he set it down. Just slightly. She did not think he knew he had done it. The candle on the shelf behind him had burned down to a quarter. She had found two more in the tin by the stove. She had not lit them. There was still enough light. When he finished, he set his spoon in the bowl the way she had seen her father do, parallel to the rim, not across it. A small thing. She did not know what it meant except that someone had taught him once. He pushed back from the table but did not stand. Outside, the wind moved around the corner of the house and then went quiet for a moment the way wind does in the middle of winter, as if it is deciding. She got up and took the bowls to the basin. He was still sitting when she came back to clear the cloth. He had his hands flat on the table, not folded, just flat, the way a man sits when he is not planning to move but has not yet decided to stay. "There's water on," she said, "if you want coffee." He nodded once. She got the pot and poured and set a cup in front of him and one at her own place and sat back down. She wrapped both hands around the cup, not because she was cold, she was not sure why. He drank. She drank. The candle threw its light up the wall and the shadows moved a little. Each time the draft came under the door. "The window in the back room," she said. "The latch doesn't catch." He looked up. "I worked it closed with a rag, but it'll need something fixed to it." He nodded again, set his cup down, looked at the window she meant, though the door was between them and it. Then he looked back at his cup. "I'll get to it," he said. It was the most he had said since she arrived. She did not answer. She just held her cup and looked at the candle on the shelf, burning down to almost nothing, and did not move to replace it yet. The candle burned out sometime before morning. She did not replace it. She just sat in the dark for a minute, listening to the draft move under the door, and then she went to bed. She did not hear him leave. But when she came through the kitchen at first light, his cup had been washed and set on the edge of the counter, upside down, the chair pushed back in, the door pulled shut, as if he had never been there, except for the cup. She stood and looked at it for a moment. Then she built the fire and put the water on. 3 days passed without much between them. He was up before her each morning and working by the time she stepped outside. She brought coffee to the edge of the porch and left it on the post without calling to him, and it was always gone when she came back. The cup washed, returned. On the fourth morning she came out and the back window was fixed. Not propped, not latched with twine, fixed. The frame had been shimmed level, and a new catch bent from iron, small and clean, and the whole thing seated flush. She opened it and closed it twice. It held without sound. She did not say anything to him about it. He did not mention it either. What the town made of the arrangement was its own matter, and she heard pieces of it second-hand. A word from the woman at the dry goods counter, not unkind exactly but deliberate, placed where she would feel the weight of it. A silence from two men near the livery when she walked past that said more than noise would have. She kept her chin level. She had been doing that longer than she had been in this town. The boy was 7. He came with the property the same way the loose porch step had, something that needed attending to and did not announce itself. He was the man's nephew, she learned, though no one said how that had come to be or where his mother had gone. The boy did not ask questions. He watched everything and said very little, which made him easier than most adults she had known. One evening he sat on the floor near the stove while she mended a shirt and did not speak for a long time, and then said, without looking up, that she sewed like his grandmother had. She kept her eyes on the cloth. "Did she?" she said. She held it the same way. "Close," she did not answer. She adjusted the cloth in her hands slightly and kept her stitches small. The boy went back to whatever he had been thinking about. The man was outside. She could hear the rhythmic sound of him stacking wood against the side of the house, settling each piece with a quiet knock, working his way steadily down the pile. The boy fell asleep on the floor before she had finished the shirt. She did not wake him. She found a folded blanket on the chest near the door and laid it over him without making a sound, and he pulled it toward his chin without fully surfacing, the way children do when they have learned to accept small kindnesses in their sleep. She stood there a moment, just a moment. Then she went back to her chair. Outside, the wood stacking had stopped. She heard the latch on the side door, then his boots in the hall, the particular sound of a man who has learned to move quietly around sleeping things. He looked into the room from the doorway, saw the boy on the floor, saw the blanket. He did not say anything. He crossed to the stove, poured water that had been warming into a tin cup, and set it on the table near her without being asked. Then he settled into the chair across from her and stretched one leg out and looked at nothing for a while. The candle between them was burning low. It had maybe an hour left. She kept sewing. The shirt was almost done. A split seam along the shoulder, not difficult, just requiring patience. She tied off the thread and bit it clean, and smoothed the seam with her thumb before folding the shirt across her knee. He was watching the candle. She knew without looking. "You've been here 6 weeks," he said. She had counted it differently. 43 days, about that, she said. "You settled in." It was not quite a question. She considered it anyway. Through the window, the sky was the particular dark of late November. Not fully black, more like iron, the clouds low enough to press. She had noticed snow in it earlier, the smell of it, cold and mineral, coming in under the door. "The boy's good company," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't talk much." "I know." She smoothed the folded shirt again. "I don't mind." He looked at the boy on the floor. Something moved across his face that she did not try to read. "His mother was my sister," he said. "She died in the spring." She did not offer condolences. She had learned by then that he did not want things softened. She simply let the words stand in the room until they found their own level. "Where did he go before he came here?" she asked. "Nowhere good." She nodded. The candle guttered once. It caught again. He picked up his cup and held it with both hands the way she had seen him do when he was thinking something through. Not drinking, just holding. The boy made a small sound in his sleep and went still. She reached for the next shirt in the pile. The snow came in the night. She heard it before she saw it. A change in the quality of the silence, something softened and muffled about the way the wind moved against the walls. She lay still for a moment, listening, and then rose before first light and went to the window. The street was white and unbroken. The livery roof, the water trough, the long hitching rail, all of it smoothed over and made the same. The sky had gone pale at the edges and the snow was still falling, not hard, just steady, the way weather falls when it has decided to stay. She built the fire up from the coals and put water on and stood at the stove until the kitchen began to hold warmth again. He came down before the boy woke. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking out the window at the street, then moved to the table and sat without speaking. She set a cup in front of him. He wrapped his hands around it the same way he had the night before. "School will be closed," he said. "Probably." He looked at the window again. "I need to check the horses. There's bread from yesterday. I'll have eggs by the time you're back." He nodded and rose and took his coat from the peg by the door. She noticed he pulled on the second pair of gloves, the heavier ones, without being told where they were. The boy came down while he was still out. He stood on the bottom step in his stocking feet and looked at the snow through the glass, and his face did something uncomplicated and young. "Can I go out?" "After breakfast." He sat at the table and she set a plate in front of him, and he ate without complaint, which she had learned to read as a form of contentment. He came back with cold following him through the door, and snow still caught in the shoulders of his coat. He sat and she set his plate down, and for a few minutes the three of them ate without talking. The fire worked steadily. Outside, the snow kept falling. She was aware of something in the room that had no name yet. Not ease exactly. Something quieter than ease, the way a face feels when it has decided what it is. The boy ate the last of his bread and looked up at him. "Can I see the horses?" He considered it. After its slows, the boy accepted this. She watched him accept it. The way he settled back in his chair without argument, without the small tightening she had seen in the first weeks, when any answer that wasn't yes made him go careful and still. She got up and took the plates to the basin. Behind her, she heard the boy ask something low, and heard him answer it. She washed the plates and listened to them talk, not the words exactly. The low register of it. Question, pause, answer, small silence, another question. The boy had not spoken like that to anyone before him. She had not noticed when it started, only that it was happening now, and had apparently been happening for some time, without her marking the moment it began. She dried her hands and didn't turn around immediately. The snow was still coming down past the window. The light outside had gone the pale, even gray of late afternoon in winter, the kind of light that makes everything look the same distance away. She watched it for a moment, and then turned back to the room. He was showing the boy something with his hands, some shape or structure, fingers moving to indicate she couldn't tell what. The boy's face was tilted up toward him, and his expression was the one she had seen only a few times, fully open, the wariness completely gone. He was 7 years old, and he had been wary since before she could remember. She had stopped expecting it to lift. She sat down at the far end of the table, and neither of them looked up. She didn't mind. That surprised her when she noticed it. That she didn't mind at all. That there was nothing in her that wanted to call the boy back or interrupt what was happening. She had spent so long being the only solid thing he could hold on to that she had forgotten it was possible for him to hold on to something else without it costing her anything. She folded her hands on the table. Outside, the snow slowed. Not stopped, but slower, the flakes larger and more deliberate, the kind that fell with some weight to them instead of driving sideways. The light shifted slightly toward the gold end of gray. He noticed it before she said anything. He looked toward the window and then looked at the boy. It's slowing. The boy was on his feet before the sentence finished. He stood too, not quickly, and reached for his coat on the hook by the door. He handed the boy his own coat without looking at her, and the boy pulled it on. Too large by a full size, the sleeves folded back twice, and she watched him button it from the bottom up with great concentration. He opened the door, and cold came in, and the boy went through it, and he followed. And he pulled the door closed behind him with the particular care of a man who knows a house is warm and means to keep it that way. She sat at the table. The fire worked in the grate. The room held its heat. Through the window she could see the two of them walking toward the barn, the boy's footprints small and irregular beside his. She stayed at the table a while, longer than she needed to. The snow had thinned almost nothing by the time they reached the barn, and by the time they came back it had stopped entirely. She had washed the breakfast things and set them to dry. She heard the door and did not turn from the window where she was standing, looking at the white yard and the long shadow the barn threw across it in the early light. The boy came in first, cheeks red, pulling at the coat buttons. He got 3 undone and gave up and let her kneel and finish them. She worked from the top down. He smelled of cold air and hay and the particular animal warmth of the barn. She folded the coat over her arm. He came in behind and latched the door. He stood on the mat and worked the snow off his boots, with the iron bar fixed to the sill for that purpose. He did not say anything about the morning or the snow or the hour. He moved to the stove and held his hands near it without touching it. She hung the coat on its hook. The boy had already gone to sit on the floor by the window, where the light was good, and he was doing what he often did in the mornings, arranging small things he had gathered, a stone, a piece of bark, 2 buttons she had given him from the jar. The logic of the arrangement was his own, and she had long since stopped trying to read it. She put water on. He sat at the table, not speaking, not restless. He had the quality she had noticed early on and never entirely gotten used to. The ability to simply be in a room without requiring the room to acknowledge him. She had known people who could not sit still without filling the silence. He was not one of them. The water heated. She made the coffee and set his cup in front of him the way she had every morning for 4 months now, without asking. Without noting that she hadn't asked, he wrapped his hands around it. The boy's arrangement fell apart, and he made a sound of assessment rather than frustration and began again. Outside, the yard was quiet the way a yard is quiet after snow, not silent but padded, the sound of things arriving slightly late, slightly softened. A bird landed on the top rail of the fence and then left. She stood at the window with her own cup and watched the place where it had been. He did not say anything for a long while. Then he said, "Ice on the water trough will be back by tonight." "I know," she said. She did not turn from the window. He did not look up from his cup. But something had passed between them in the saying of it and the answering of it, and they both knew what it was, and neither said so. The boy finished his arrangement of sticks and held it up for inspection. She turned from the window to look at it. He turned from his cup to look at it. The boy watched them both. "Good," she said. The boy set it down carefully on the table and went to get his coat. She rinsed her cup at the basin. The snow in the yard had taken on the flat white light of late morning, and the shadows of the fence posts lay long and blue across it. She could see where the bird had landed on the top rail. A small compression in the snow, 2 inches wide, already beginning to fill. He pushed back from the table. He stood and brought his cup to the basin without being asked, which he had not done in the beginning, and which he did now without comment, as if he had always done it. She was aware of his standing there, the way you are aware of weather. He put on his coat. The boy was already at the door, hat pulled down past his ears, looking up at both of them with the patient expression of children who have learned that adults take longer. He opened the door. Cold came in, clean and sharp. He paused in the frame. She was still at the basin, her hands around the rim of it. She did not look at him. Outside, the yard was white and quiet. The fence post stood in a straight line toward the road. He said, "Should be back before dark." "All right," she said. She heard the door close. She heard the 2 sets of footsteps, one short, one long, cross the porch and descend into the snow. She heard the boy say something and heard his low response, and then heard nothing but the yard's particular silence. She stood there another moment. On the table, the boy's arrangement of sticks was still standing. 11 small pieces laid into a shape that was almost a house. The longest piece formed the roof beam. She did not touch it. She went to the window. They were crossing the yard together, the man and the boy, walking toward the fence gate. The boy's steps were quick and uneven in the snow. The man walked beside him at the pace the boy set, not ahead, not behind. At the gate, he put his hand on the boy's shoulder to guide him through. He did not look back at the house. She had not expected him to. She stood at the window with her hands at her sides and watched them go down the road, the smaller shape close beside the larger, until the road curved and they were gone. The yard was still. The impression where the bird had landed on the fence rail was smaller now. Another hour in the snow would have covered it completely. She went to start the bread.